All right, guys, welcome to Question of Strength. Basically, where I talk about training stuff that interests me, stuff I tried this week, stuff I'm planning to try in the future, or just topic that I find either interesting or something that need to be clarified so that you have the understanding of training, nutrition, supplementation, and so on and so forth. I will also obviously take a good portion of this presentation to answer your questions. That's always the most fun part of the presentation, at least for me, because the adrenaline that is generated when I have to quickly answer a question without having time to think about it before, it really amps me up, and that gives me oftentimes better answers than actually if I had time to think about it. So it's always interesting, and obviously the quality of this program depends entirely on the quality of your questions. So the more questions we have, the more interesting this presentation is going to get. Now, before we get to your questions, which you can always post in the chat room on the right of your screen, I want to talk about a training topic that has always been of great interest to me, and on which I confess I've moved back and forth between two different viewpoints, and that is training frequency. Why am I talking about trading frequency? Because of something I just started doing. It's something I've done before, mostly when I was competing and training as an Olympic weightlifter, but also when I, for example, wanted to specialize on the snatch group high pull or on a bench press, which is basically doing one lift that I really want to improve and do it pretty much every single day, sometimes even several times a day. And that's not a novel thing by any shape or form. Of course, it might sound novel to you if all your source of information is social media and what's trendy or not, but it's actually something that's been around for a long time. Well, first of all, because high level weightlifters, as in Olympic weightlifting, that's pretty much how they train. They are squatting in some form. Uh, Oftentimes 6 days a week, 5, 6 days a week, could be front squat, could be back squat. They're also doing a variation of the clean and jerk and snatch pretty much every single day. Maybe they have like Sunday off. That's pretty much it. So it's been going on for a long time, and they are even like people in North America not affiliated with Olympic weightlifting that actually have published work on the squat everyday program. Matt Perryman comes to mind. Now, it's something that I personally did for a long time. As I mentioned, when I was training for weightlifting, I would squat pretty much every day. And that's when I wasn't my strongest on the squat. I squatted 600 for a single and 550 for five. And I also front squatted for 85. I actually could have front squatted 500. What actually happened is I had 500 on my shoulders. I squatted down, and halfway up, I blanked out. So I had to drop the bar, even though I knew would have been able to do it. Anyway, the point is that I got my strongest squat when I was squatting every day, sometimes twice a day. Also, when I wanted to focus on my snatch grip high pull, I increased it by close to 100 pounds, if not even more than 100 pounds, by essentially training the high pull every single day for 4 weeks. And when I did my best bench press, which was 445, I also would bench press at least 4 times a week. Okay. Contrast that to more, I would say, current information about hypertrophy, which found that there is no huge advantage in training a muscle or a lift more often to trigger muscle growth, provided that the overall volume, the overall weekly volume is the same. So if you're doing 20 reps, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in one workout, two workouts, three workouts, six workouts. Okay, the effect of hypertrophy seems to be more correlated with volume and effort level than the frequency of training the muscle. Okay, why am I squatting every day then? Well, because for strength and performance, I do believe that higher frequency is better because hypertrophy is just about making a muscle grow larger. Okay, whereas performance, yes, there's a muscular aspect, but there's also neurological aspects and technical aspects. And you can gain strength by improving any one of these three factors. Okay. Now, when it comes to hypertrophy, and I talked about this in a previous video, when it comes to hypertrophy, it seems that the muscle protein synthesis response. So basically, when you are training, you are triggering an increase in protein synthesis, and the higher the increase is, the more muscle you're going to be building. Okay, and a recent study that was not published, but was given or explained on social media repeatedly showed that if the period between two stimulus or stimuli is too short, the amount of protein synthesis resulting from the second bout is lower than it could have been. So basically, if you have, let's say, less than 72 hours between two workouts for, say, muscle, you get a smaller increase in protein synthesis, therefore maybe less muscle growth. Okay, and that doesn't mean you get no muscle growth. It's still effective, but if you wait a bit longer, you probably get a stronger response from that workout from a muscle building perspective. Okay, now the argument could be that if you're training so frequently that even if you have, let's say you have like 5 or 6 sessions a week, even if you have slightly lower protein synthesis increase on a day-to-day basis, at the end of the week, it can still compound to a large amount of stimulus. But regardless of that, for hypertrophy, I would kind of agree that frequency is not as important as it is for strength. But strength, here's the thing: contracting your muscle, producing force, uh, is motor skill. Just like doing a movement is motor skill. And the key to motor skill acquisition and perfectioning is the frequency of practice. If you want to play golf, for example, and you are only allowed to hit, let's say, 700 balls per week, would you get better at golf faster if you hit 700 balls once a week, or if you're hitting 100 balls every single day? I would argue that you would improve a lot faster if you practice every day hitting 100 balls. You probably would get even better by hitting 50 balls twice a week, twice a day. But that's because first, the quality of the practice will be better, but also because if you have 6 or 7 days before doing a pattern again, the programming is not as efficient and as permanent as if you do it every single day. You always need some refresher. Okay. And now, of course, once you have truly mastered movement, frequency might become less important. Okay. But still, to develop the neuromuscular capacities, the capacity to increase that signal to activate the muscle, but more importantly, the capacity of the muscles to respond to the signal will improve faster if you do that movement more often. The second point is important. There is something called the neuromuscular junction, which is basically the part in the muscle where the nerve connects to the muscle and where the information sent from the brain to the muscle to fire, it reaches the muscle and triggers the contraction process. And that is what's called synapses. The synapses are what's transmitting that information. Now, your synapses can become more or less sensitive. They can also increase in numbers. And what has been found is that if you train a little more often, your synaptic connection is better, it's more efficient. You require less neural drive to get the same strength production. So you become more neurologically efficient. Okay. Furthermore, over time, you can even start adding new synapses, making the connection even faster. That might be one of the reasons why Olympic weightlifters who don't look like they can lift 500 pounds overhead can, because at the synaptic level, they are just so much more efficient. So they can use a much greater percentage of their muscle strength potential at a much lower neurological cost. Okay. And that's kind of weird because the more efficient you become, the more you can train an exercise without draining yourself. So that's kind of why the reason why Olympic weightlifters can train so often, even on seemingly complex movement, because their neurological efficiency is so high because of years and years and years of high frequency practice that for them doing a snatch is not more demanding than doing a curl for you and I. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of a higher frequency is that you can develop neurological efficiency much faster, and the faster that increases, the more you can use your full potential to produce force. Another benefit is that, well, when you're practicing a movement more often, you are obviously practicing that skill. And the more often you practice a skill, the more permanent you make it, which is important that if you're doing high frequency work, technical efficiency is super important because if you practice bad motor habits, you're going to ingrain permanently those bad motor habits and it's going to be really, really hard to correct. Okay, but if you're practicing proper technique, the more often you practice, the more efficient you become at the movement. So you're more efficient at the movement, and the nervous system is more efficient, which is two of the biggest portion of what's needed to gain strength. So, and you will still get some muscle, even though the protein synthesis might be lower. So the point is that if you're training for hypertrophy, frequency doesn't matter that much. I mean, I think that there's a large part of personal preference there. When I'm training for, I still prefer to train each muscle twice a week rather than one. That's just the way I'm built, and because of that, I'm more motivated and train harder when I do that. But you can get fine results for hypertrophy by hitting a muscle once a week, provided that the stimulus is sufficient. But when it comes to strength, I believe that there's a distinct and significant advantage in doing it more frequently. Doesn't mean you have to squat every day, but you can certainly increase your frequency to twice or three times a week. Most athletes I'm training, and I've been training for a while, squat, but not just squat, but basically do the big movement patterns, the key movement patterns, 3 days a week. The way the training is structured for them is that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we have our main strength workouts, and they are whole body workouts, typically with four, maybe five exercises, so big compound movements to be as efficient as possible, covering the whole body to some extent. And then on Saturday, it would be what's called a gap workout. The gap workout is a smaller session, lower stress session that is oftentimes used mostly for hypertrophy. So your whole training program is based on big compound multi-joint exercises. There's a good chance that some muscles will be left underdeveloped, understimulated, because on the big lifts, you will always have more dominant muscles than others, depending on your leverage, your experience, and so on and so forth. So some muscle might not get fully developed, and maybe you want to develop those muscles, and that would be done on the gap workouts. Also, workout where you are focusing mostly on big compound lift. It's kind of hard to fix weak points. So the gap workout is where you fix weak points. Okay, as far as the muscular development is concerned. And at first, I will confess that when an athlete starts working with me and he's not used to squatting or lifting, bench pressing 3 days a week, the first 2 or 3 weeks, the performance decreases just because they're not used to that amount of stimulus. But very quickly, they just blow up their strength up. And I'm doing the same thing. Why am I doing that for my squat? First of all, it's always a goal of mine to squat 500. To me, like 500 on a squat, I'm using a safety bar squat, so that's equivalent to like a 550 back squat. On the safety bar squat, you can use roughly 10% less weight than on a regular barbell squat because the bar is higher. So from a leverage standpoint, it's much harder because the more you lean forward, the higher the bar is, the more it increases load at the spine. It's harder to maintain that. Anyway, so I've always my goal has always been to always be able to squat 500. Now sometimes I do get away from squatting because I have other goals in mind. So, but as soon as I get back to regular training, I want to bring my squat up back up to 500, um, and I want to squat 500 until I'm 50 or 60. Okay, I've seen that. I've seen former clients of mine do that, or maybe not 500, but pretty impressive lift. So that's certainly something I want to do. And for me, the best way to do that is for a certain period of time is to focus on increasing my squat. And to me, that means training the squat between 3 and 6 days a week, depending on my recovery capacity. Now, one thing I noticed since I started squatting every day is that oddly enough, my lower body aches a lot less. I was starting to have like hip pains, and like walking upstairs was kind of hard on my knees and hips. Um, when I was doing my martial arts session, was also hard for my hips. And I figured, well, maybe I'm just getting old, and it's finally catching up to me. And as soon as I started squatting every single day, I don't have those pains anymore. That might just be like something that happened like that. But I've read the same thing from other people who've done that type of program. And when I go back to when I was squatting every day, I never had lower body issues. Of course, I was younger, but still, the fact that I'm painless now, it's a nice change. Uh, and also, my performance is improving quickly. How I do it? Right now, I'm going to tell you how I do it, but understand that my goals might not be your goal. Okay, uh, I don't want legs that are too big right now. I know it sounds weird, but I have short legs and long torso, and I'm super quad dominant. Doesn't take much for my legs to look out of balance, and also having some chafing between my legs, so it's uncomfortable walking or running or stuff like that, which I'm doing a lot more nowadays. Uh, so I'm doing exclusively sets of 1 or 2 reps. It's only singles and doubles. Every day I ramp up to my training max for that day. The difference between a training max and an all-out max is that the training max doesn't require you to get amped up. A training max is something you probably have like 10, maybe 15 pounds in reserve. It is very challenging. It is done with perfect form. So it's probably the heaviest weight you can do without breaking form and without psyching yourself up. Okay. And that can be repeated pretty often. Most people, their training max would be roughly 90, 92% of their actual max. Okay. So I'm ramping up to a training max. And every day I'm doing it slightly differently. For example, on day one, I will hold a 3 second pause in the bottom. Day two, 2 second pause on the bottom. Day three, 1 second pause at the bottom. Day four, no pause at the bottom. Then I start the cycle over again. Sometimes I will even do, for example, um, week one, 2 reps, 3 second pause. Week two, day two, sorry, 2 second pause, 2 reps. Day three, 1 second pause, 2 reps. Day four, no pause, 2 reps. And I'm going to do the same thing, but with single. So the lower volume of reps for me means that there's very little soreness happening because even though I'm sweating every day and I'm going up to a very, very heavy weight, I might have a total of 10 repetitions in my workout. And maybe five of those are challenging. So the amount of calcium ions that get leaked, which causes the muscle soreness, is very low at each workout. So I can actually recover fine. In fact, on 2 days ago, I actually squatted 3 times a day. I did my morning workout, and I did an afternoon session. Then my son trained, so I trained with him. I did squats again, and on all 3 workouts, I was able to work up to the same training. I was able to recover. So that's something I'm doing. I'm doing high frequency squat, not to blow up my quads, actually to become as efficient as possible and develop my nervous system as much as possible. All right. Also find it makes me feel good. Okay, we have a decent number of questions already, but never hesitate to pose your questions in the chat section. First question. Uh, for intermediate lifters, is it better to use concurrent programming or specialization? If specialization is the best way to train, how do you like to structure split frequency, volume, etc.? It depends on the goal. Okay, are you training? Like you mentioning into lifters, fine. Is it for performance? Is it for hypertrophy? Is it for strength? Because my answer might be different in different cases. Also, it will depend on their priorities. Like I just use my own example. My priority right now is to bring my squat up. So I'm using what could be called a specialization approach because I'm squatting every single day. So the amount of squatting I'm doing greatly exceeds the work I'm doing for other muscles or other movement pattern. Okay, but I have a goal, and my goal is to bring on my squat. If your goal is to be an overall lifter, or if your goal is an athlete or a bodybuilder wanting maximum muscle, specialization is probably the last approach I'm going to be using. I'm a big fan of specialization, but the goal of specialization is to continue progressing either in strength or in size when more traditional programming has stopped working. Okay, so for example, if you are a power lifter and your squat is going nowhere, well, you might do a squat specialization, squatting 3 days a week. One day focus on eccentric, one day focus on static dynamic, one day focusing on concentric for maybe 4 weeks. That will just boost your neurological efficiency and will make you uh, go up. As far as hypertrophy is concerned, same thing. If you have like you're at a point where you're not growing anymore because well, the more advanced you are, the more adapted you are to training, right? And the more adapted you are to training, the harder it is to cause further adaptation. That's how the body works. You impose a stress on the body. If the body deems that stress sufficient to cause a threat, it will adapt itself by making itself more resilient to that stress in the future. But if you've been training for a while, for a long time, you've caused a lot of adaptation. So your body is a lot more resilient external stressors. So it becomes harder and harder and harder to impose a level of stress that will actually force your body to further adapt. So you might need more volume, more frequency, more advanced methods. Could be many things. The problem is that you also get stronger when you are more advanced. You might be older, so that means that you might have harder time recovering. The heavier you lift, yeah, your muscles can handle it, but the tendons, skeletal system, all that stuff is pretty much the same as it was when you were weaker. So, a 400-pound squat will be more stressful than a 200-pound squat, even if both are 80%. See what I mean? Uh, so the more advanced you are, the more trauma you can impose, but the more resilient you are. The problem is that if you have to increase training stress significantly to keep progressing, then because you're stronger, because you might have a harder time recovering because of age or whatever, then increasing overall volume might not allow you to properly adapt to your training. You're going to exceed your capacity to recover. So that's where specialization comes in. For an advanced lifter, you need a very strong stimulus to keep progressing in some regard, but you can't do that for the whole body at the same time because doing so for every muscle or every big lift would just cause an excessive overall amount of stress, which would make positive adaptations unlikely. You might just drive yourself down. So that's why specialization is a useful tool. Is if you reach a point in your career and your development that you either absolutely need to use a dramatic increase in training stress to progress, but you just can't do that for the whole body. And you specialize on one or two muscles or one lift, okay? And you can rotate those. Uh, or you might be in a situation where, for some reason, you need to bring one lift up as fast as possible, maybe a bench press contest, squat contest, personal goal, whatever, then it might be a good approach, even if you're at a point where you can still make gains in the traditional way. So specialization is one of my favorite tools, but it needs to be used when you need it, either to get a quick boost in the lift because you need that for an event or personal goal of yours, or because, well, you have stagnated hypertrophy wise, or even strength wise by training everything equally. So you know what, I'm going to just boost the stress on one lift or one muscle or two muscles, then decrease the rest. Because that's the important thing. When you specialize, it's not just about increasing volume or frequency or training stress for two muscles or a lift. It's about decreasing the training stress for other groups so that you don't reach an excessively high level of training stress. What are your favorite nootropic products? Well, I really love Brain Candy by Biotest. In fact, I can't wait for the new pouch to be made. I've always responded very well to that product. I remember that first time I was in Colorado, actually, Tim Patterson, Nation's owner, came down with a glass and said, "Shot, drink this. What's in it?" I said, "Just drink it. Tell me how you feel." Drink it. And I didn't notice that much. I mean, I felt happy, felt good, but to me, I mean, perception of your own mental state is kind of hard to establish. But when I went to dinner with my wife, she she said, but she asked me, "Well, are you on speed?" I said, "Why?" Because you can't stop talking like you. And you normally when we eat, I mean, I'm literally not emitting a sound. I just eat and then I'm a really poor person to have dinner with. But now I just went from one story to the other and with like super high energy. And I said, dude, no, that's brain candy. And it really works for my brain chemistry. Now, one thing I want to make uh, clear is that nootropics or anything that targets the nervous system will not work equally well for everyone because how effective a specific nootropic is will be highly dependent on your own neurotransmitters balance. So, for example, like me, the reason why brain candy works so well is that my dopamine level and acetylcholine levels are pretty low. Okay. And if you know my neurotransmitter, my neurotyping system, you know how to evaluate that. So I've always had like low dopamine, low neurotransmitter, very high adrenaline. So to me, brain candy, which focuses mostly on dopamine and acetylcholine, brings me up to an optimal state. Like I already have I already have high adrenaline. I already have high serotonin. I already have pretty high GABA. The only downside for me is glutamate and dopamine and acetylcholine. By increasing acetylcholine, dopamine, you're bringing up my weak points neurologically speaking. But some people with higher dopamine and high acetylcholine might not notice the same benefits as I do. Other nootropics I like NoPep. Uh, it increases the speed of neurological transmission. So I use it only when I have a very heavy workout. So if I want to like perform optimally, I'm testing my bench, I'm testing my squat, or it's a very heavy session. I'm going to take my brain candy in the morning, and let's say 30 minutes ish before workout, I'm going to have like 20 milligrams of no pep, and that normally to me leads to the best performance I can get. But again, just with nootropics, as I mentioned, it really depends on your own neurological balance and which neurotransmitter you need to amp up the most. All right. High intensity, low volume training seems to have really beaten me up. I feel like I'm still recovering from it months later. Could switching exercise, could not switching exercises enough be the cause of this? Not likely. If anything, changing exercises more often is more neurologically demanding than sticking with the same movement. First, go back to the squat portion. When I talked about the high frequency training earlier today, uh, doing a lift more often, becoming more technically efficient in that lift, reduces the neurological power required to do that lift. So the more often you practice a movement, the better you become at it, the less neurologically costly that same exercise becomes. So, if anything, sticking with the same movement for longer decreases neurological stress and should actually reduce fatigue. I actually noticed that when I was training um, an Olympic track cyclist, like you those who run in like drive in circles with the huge legs. Anyway, I was training this guy, and at first I would rotate the type of squat that he was using every 4 weeks. So, maybe like block one, we might use front squat, block two, maybe box squat, block three, maybe safety bar squat. Just rotate the lift. And what we noticed is that the first 2 weeks of each new block, his performance on the track would go down, like feel like crap, not perform well. The moment we stop changing the squat movement and you just stuck with box squat because that was the movement he was the most comfortable in, then his performance on track never dipped down when he would, at any block. I believe that the contrary, having too much exercise variation, especially if it's in the form of big compound lift or multi-joint movement, it can actually increase the neurological stress, not decrease it. So it's probably not that. Now, that being said, going to failure, and if you're really good at going to failure, now I'm not faking yourself out, it is very draining. It is very draining. Don't let the low volume fool you. Okay, uh, lots of people who are training that way are reporting the same symptoms that you are, and I would say that those who have those symptoms are often those who are less structurally built for heavy lifting. What I mean by that is that those who are like big jointed, like thick forearm, big head, big neck, they don't seem to be as impacted by going to failure with a low volume approach. But people with, let's say, longer limbs, smaller tendons, smaller bone structures, for some reason, they seem to be a lot more impacted by the very high intensity training to failure, even with low volume, and oftentimes will need more deload than people who are not of that structure. So that might be it. Or it might just be the fact that the overall stress in your life might have been excessive. But yeah, like going to true failure, task failure, when you actually fail to complete a rep is extremely hard on the nervous system and on the muscles. That's why I like uh, high effort training or effort based training, but I don't use it all the time. I prefer to cycle it, let's say a 4 to 6 weeks block, then a 4 to 6 weeks of higher volume, and so on and so forth. I believe that it's a lot safer and less demanding for most people. That's why I don't like to be married with one single training approach because it's never the answer for everyone all the time. All right. Thank you for your advice and this podcast. Several weeks back, you gave me some advice for starting off my 14-year-old hockey player daughter on lifting. Her game improved. I don't know if it's the strength or the confidence that comes from going to the gym. But thank you anyway. Well, I appreciate that. By the way, I'm working on a new project. I'm going to start working on that. I don't want to say too much because I don't want people to steal my idea. But I want to create a resource that would be called something like Elite Kids or something like that. And it's going to be an online resource for training kids. It's going to cover strength training. It's going to cover like all the progression, all the exercises going from 6 years old to 18. It's going to have also speed, agility work. It's going to have conditioning work, and it's going to have nutrition advice, all that stuff. Anyway, that's my new project that I'm super motivated about. I'm really glad that you've seen improvement. Now, I think that the reason why she improved is likely a combination of both. Like she probably has improved her physical capacities because if she's never trained before, okay, the neurological adaptations will be very fast. You can actually have somewhat decent neurological improvement in as short as little as 2 weeks. And what I mean by that is that the nervous system becomes better at sending a strong signal to the muscles. Okay. So when you have that, you can apply that same increased amount of neurological activation to sporting movement. So the sporting movement that you already mastered, now you can apply them with more force, more power, more speed, just because your capacity to send a strong signal is increased. And that can happen in as short as 2 weeks with beginner lifters. So I would definitely see that it's one of the causes for improvement. And the confidence should never be underestimated either. I mean, it's been well established that as athletes, the mindset, how much you believe in yourself makes a big difference. I'm going to use myself as an example. When I was playing high school football, I was not very skilled. I mean, the first 2 seasons, I didn't do much. But the moment I started lifting, I believed that it would give me an unfair advantage, and I played like it, and I was dominant. Then once I got to college, everybody lifted. Even though I was in the high average when it comes to strength, I did not see that as an unfair advantage because everybody lifted. In high school, back in my day, nobody lifted. So that gave me an advantage. But in college, everybody lifted. So I did not have that psychological advantage, and I crumbled under pressure. So that there's a big component there. But there is definitely some actual physical capacities improvement at that age when you're starting to lift. Absolutely. My girlfriend is a typical type 3 and is a typical overthinker, especially after work. Would you recommend GABA or rhodiola rosea or both to calm her down after work? Okay, first, I don't like to make specific supplement recommendation. Uh, Even though they are over the counter, to me, and not as obviously not as powerful as medication, you can still have negative effect. You can still have product that will have individual variances. So I'm not comfortable saying that you need to take this or that, especially since GABA uh, can actually be really hit and miss with different people, even of the same neurotype. Also, the moment you start playing with neurotransmitters, you always have potential drawbacks. Okay, for example, everything that boosts dopamine will decrease serotonin. Everything that increases serotonin will decrease dopamine. So yeah, you type 3, so that person has low serotonin, low-ish GABA, high glutamate, high adrenaline, and moderate acetylcholine, depending on the person. For those who don't know, the type 3 in my neurotyping system is like the typical overthinker, routine-based person, borderline OCD, doesn't like variation, doesn't like change, work according to a schedule, etc., etc. Okay, and that is all these habits are actual subconscious strategies to reduce the level of anxiety. Because type 3, they are people with naturally high or elevated um, anxiety level. Anxiety is nothing more than your neurons firing too fast for you to fully control your thought process. Okay, that's all it is. So the neurotransmitter that would calm you down, that would reduce anxiety, are the neurotransmitter that slow down your neurotransmitter. They are called inhibitory neurotransmitters. So it's serotonin and it's GABA mostly. Okay, so if you're someone who has anxiety issues, then you are low in serotonin, low GABA. And the way the body will subconsciously protect itself against more anxiety is that it will seek to only do things that it knows will not harm them. So that's why they always follow the same routine. That's also why they will overanalyze every single point. Because by overanalyzing everything, they make sure that there's no unknown variable that can come in and harm them. Okay. That's also why they don't like to try new activities, etc. Okay, so introduce your strategy to reduce anxiety. Anyway, so yeah, increasing GABA could help. Okay, but more often than not, it's mostly serotonin that's the issue. But certainly, you want to uh, help her reduce neurological activation. I would not go with GABA right away, again, because it's really hit and miss, and some people have really bad reaction to it. I would start with something more gentle. The combination I would recommend is either magnesium, okay? Magnesium could be magnesium glycinate, magnesium biglycinate, magnesium threonate, which would be the best choice, or magnesium taurate, okay? Uh, Now, the taurate, the glycinate, the treonate, that's called a chelate or chelate, and it's basically a molecule added to the magnesium to change its absorption. But once the magnesium is absorbed, that substance will also have effect on the body. That's why, for example, magnesium glycinate is something that will calm you down. Magnesium treonate is something that will calm you down while also improving neurological function. Something like magnesium taurate will balance you. If you're too high, it will bring you down. If you're too down, it will bring you up. So magnesium by itself will also help because it dislodges the adrenaline from the beta-adrenergic receptors. So the adrenaline amps up your neurons too fast, which is one of the problems of the type 3. So magnesium would decrease activation by reducing the activity of the adrenaline. And if you add the glycinate, if you add the treonate, if you had the magnesium taurate, that will help that. So, for example, during the day, I would probably go with something like 250 milligrams of magnesium taurate. Um, and that would be a good product because it will calm her down slightly, reducing anxiety, but will not shut her down completely. And then in the evening, you could either go with a magnesium glycinate, magnesium biglycinate, or magnesium treonate. So that would be my first. That's the first thing I would try because, well, first of all, most people are deficient in magnesium. So even if that doesn't solve her anxiety issues completely, you know what? It's still going to help her physiologically in many, many, many different regards. And there's really no side effect for magnesium, except if you have like high doses and you might have like stool issue. But with like between 250 and 500 milligrams, there's no issue. Like twice a day, that's perfectly fine. By the way, magnesium is one of those things that smaller doses absorb better than bigger doses. So I like to have like 2 or 3 intakes of between 250 and 500 milligrams per day. Now, one thing that she could have is glycine. Glycine is an amino acid, but it also acts as a neurotransmitter and it inhibits the neurotransmitters, the neurons. So it slows the neurons down, it calms you down. It also increases serotonin. So for a type 3, by increasing serotonin, but by also helping GABA and serotonin do their job at calming down the nervous system, glycine is a very interesting product. So I would go with, again, you will use it with your magnesium. So during the day, let's say you have 250 milligrams of magnesium chlorate, then you could have like 3 grams. Well, start with 2 grams of glycine. You can increase it to 3 or even 4 grams. And in the evening, you would have your magnesium, let's say glycinate. In that case, I would go with treonate. And then you would have 5 grams of glycine. Glycine is something that you need to try titrate up to see your tolerance to it from a gastric perspective. But glycine is super interesting because first, again, it calms the brain down directly. Second, it increases serotonin. Thirdly, it also acts as a protein synthesis stimulator. Like the amino acid that the most directly increase protein synthesis or muscle growth is leucine. The second most is glycine. Plus, glycine is very important for the fabrication of tendinous tissue. So for the leucine helps rebuild the muscle, the glycine helps rebuild the tendon. So that's also a side benefit of glycine. So it's something I've been using for like 20 years, and just research has been published recently showing all the benefits of glycine. So I would go with that. Magnesium, glycine, both are very mild, very gentle, and they are very likely to help her with her issues, much more so than using a more aggressive GABA approach. Rhodiola is a good product. It rebalances all those neurotransmitters, so it might be a second line of attack that I would use. I would deploy it after if magnesium and glycine is not sufficient. I would deploy rhodiola, and GABA would be like a last approach. You know, if nothing else works. All right, having long arms. Uh, 2 meters wingspan for wingspan 15 centimeters longer than height. That is long. I always have a hard time improving my chin up performance. What would be the best three strategies for someone like me? In fact, longer arms typically are better at pulling movements. It's pressing movements that they're not good at. But it might not just be your wingspan, it might be your lower body weight because like everything, when you're doing a chin up, you need to lift everything below your chin up, below your elbow. Everything below your elbow, you actually have to lift it up. So if your body weight is, because if you're tall, you're fairly tall, it's much easier to be heavy. That makes sense. But that's still weight. You need to pull up that weight. So if you're, let's say, 190 centimeters and 100 kilos, it's going to be much harder for you to do a pull up than someone who's only 70 kilos because they have less weight to lift. And yes, you might have the muscle to do it, or you might not. But body weight is the first thing I would look at your height, not so much the arm length, because most of the best pullers I've known have long arms. It's better leverage. Then the second thing could be the ratio between the forearm and the upper arm. Again, that might impact it a lot more than limb length. So really, I would not think it's mostly arm length. I would think it's mostly the body weight thing because, well, again, if you're 100 kilos, I don't know what you weigh, but if you're 100 kilos, right from the start, you have to lift something like 80% of your body weight holding your chin up without adding any weight. So if you're 100 kilos, you have to lift 80 kilos. So you might not have the strength to lift 80 kilos with good form, which is why you have problem with chin ups, not because of your long arms. So you need to assess pulling strength. So I would really focus on increasing pulling strength in movement that are somewhat specific to chin-ups. Could be lat pull downs. If you cannot do a very strict lat pull down with body weight, it's going to be kind of hard to do chin-ups, okay, because you're lifting your body weight. See what I mean? In a lat pull down, you are doing, let's say, your body weight, but in a very stable and fixed position, which is much easier than doing a pull up in an unstable position. You need to be stronger than body weight on pull downs. You're good at pull ups. That's kind of a rule. Okay. Second, if you have long arms, you will probably need to focus a bit more on forearms and bicep strength than people with shorter arms who would need to focus more on that. Okay, so that's certainly something I would do. Now, as far as specific strategies for building, improving the chin-ups, uh, first would be the high frequency approach. Okay, just be, you might be limited by how efficient you are at pull-ups. So one method I could recommend, and I've used that with a CrossFit athlete. He went to the CrossFit Games, and his weak point was his strict handstand push-up, so not using a kipping, and he could do 11, and which is for me pretty good. But if you're at the game level, you need to be able to do something like 20 or 30 to be in the game. Okay, so we use an approach where every single day he was doing sets of submaximal uh, strict handstand push-ups. The way we selected the number of reps and etc. is every Sunday he would test is maximum handstand push-ups. So let's say on Sunday he did, let's say, 10 handstand push-ups. Then for all the following weeks, you would do sets of 7 to 8 reps. You would do sets of 70 to 80% of his maximum. By the way, all those reps, when he did 10, for example, need to be perfectly clean reps. No cheating, no change in body position because that's going to screw up the data. So we were doing 70 to 80% work. So it's every single day he would do 3 to 5 sets of, let's say, 7 to 8 reps. If he gets something like 12 reps, then he will do between 8 and 9 reps every set. If he did 5 reps on Sunday, then he would do 3 or 4 reps. You see what I'm saying? And that would be done every single day. And it for him, because he worked at the gym, he would just do sets throughout the day just to practice the movement. But for you, you can simply start each workout with that. Just start each workout with that. You can even add 1 or 2 sets at the end of the session if you want. But the goal is to make those sets sub-maximal compared to the test that you did on every Sunday. Okay, and that would be movement practice. The more efficient, just again, if you go back to what I was talking about earlier when I talked about my squatting every day, you become more neurologically efficient at the exercise, become more technically efficient at the exercise, which dramatically boosts performance. Pavel called that greasing the groove, just practicing your movements as often as possible to a non limit level. Okay? So first, get stronger on pulling movement. I mean, if you cannot very strict lat pull down, let's say uh, over body weight for 10 reps, you can do proper chin up for 10 reps. So that's the first thing you need to look at. Second, because of your longer arms, you probably need more focus on biceps strength, not just size, strength, biceps strength and forearm strength. And then you need to practice those movements off. All right. To spare my lower back and avoid the barbell back squat, I need to do 5 sets of 6 to 8 reps. What alternative do you suggest? I don't understand the question. To spare your lower back. Okay. I'm assuming you have a lower back issue. And avoid the barbell back squat, I need to do 5 sets of 6 to 8. So are you saying that you keep doing the back squat with sets of 6 to 8, or you don't do the back squat, then you don't mention the exercise? It's not clear. Maybe you want to just repost it. What are you doing and what are you exactly are you asking? Sorry if I can't be more helpful right now, but if you give me more information, I can help you. Is it possible to increase sprint speed with neural charge workout that you do you more often? Okay, that last portion didn't sound right. Is it possible to increase sprint speed with neural charge workout? I'm going to stick to that part because the other part doesn't make sense. Um, Yes and no. Okay, neural charge workout. Essentially, the way it works is by increasing the state of activation of the nervous system. So your neurons are firing faster. That will help you create a stronger, more powerful muscle contraction, which helps you push harder on the floor and also having a faster stride frequency. That helps. However, you need to understand how the, I want to say, activation and tension relationship works. Let's say that your brain is completely relaxed. You're either watching Netflix or you're just waking up in the morning. Your nervous system is chill, it's inhibited. Your neurons are firing very slowly. So if you were to test your maximum speed or strength at that point, it would be very low, okay? Because you don't have the neurological state to send a very strong, powerful signal for the muscles, okay? Now, if you gradually amp up your nervous system, you wake up your nervous system, your neurons are firing faster and faster and faster, you do increase muscle tension. Yes. Look at yourself. When you are calm, relaxed, inhibited, your muscle tone will be softer. Okay, notice that. And when you amp up your nervous system to get more ready for action, then your muscle tone will increase. Your muscle tone increase because a higher muscle tone makes you better at quickly producing force. You're in the state to produce maximum speed and force. So at first, you increase your neuron activation. your neural activation, your neural speed. You do increase strength potential, you do increase power potential, you do increase speed potential. But if you keep emptying yourself up even more, now instead of having a higher muscle tone, your muscles become tight. There's a very strong correlation between neurological activity and muscle tone. Okay, if you are for some reason like super tight, it's often a state of neurological activation. You have several people who have mobility issues on the squat entirely due to anxiety. They do a body weight squat and it's perfect. Just put a bar on their shoulders. They have inner anxiety, and their hip flexors and hip flexors tighten up, and they can't full squat. Okay, because the thing is that anxiety, that overactivation of the neurons will increase tension, mostly in the flexor muscle. So yes, amping your brain up can increase strength and power and speed, but amping yourself up too much will decrease it by making flexor muscles tighter. Flexor muscles mean that when you're pushing down against the floor to produce force, you're fighting against your hip flexors that are tight. That reduces force application on the ground. You also are fighting against tight hamstrings, which means that your stride length will be shorter. So you are actually losing speed. I was training this bobsleigh guy, and because of his work schedule, he could only train 3 days a week. So we did both the speed and the strength sessions on the same day. So on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do both sessions each day. And so at first, we started with a strength workout. We do a strength workout, and every 2 weeks, he would pull a hamstring. I figure, well, and he would always tell me that I started my sprinting session. It was awesome. I felt super powerful, but boom, I would pull my hamstring. When we reversed the order, we started with the sprint session and did the strength session later. These pulls stopped because the lifting session did amp up his nervous system, which increased muscle tone, made him tight during the sprint, and he just would pull muscle. So yeah, in theory, activating the nervous system will increase speed. But if you increase it too much, you will actually make it worse. And the problem is that it's kind of hard to gauge how much you will respond unless you've done it before. So you need to find out for yourself. If you're someone who's already amped up all the time, then doing a neural charge session might not be a good idea because it will just put you in that overactivation. Thoughts on trying to overhead press in the scapular plane and antagonistically vertical pull in the scapular plane. Do you have a power push pull leg program to buy it? To buy. Um, I mean, I've seen people do that. Okay, uh, I've used it a bit with not overhead. I did it with more vertical or horizontal pulling, horizontal pressing with pulleys at the same time. But mostly to work on, for example, when you're striking, you need to pull one side when you to help you punch faster. So it was really a specific thing, using the front pull to potentiate the push. Okay, I haven't tried it in the vertical plane, a vertical pull, so I could not tell you. It's not something that I really like unless it's for a specific purpose. Okay, I think it's just overly complicated for no reason. That's not, and again, it might work, it might be fine, but it's not in my toolbox. It's not something that I use. So I really can't comment on that. Do you have a power push pull leg program to buy? Uh, Not really, because when I use the push pull leg program, it's mostly for hypertrophy. I don't. It's funny. Mostly for me, it's mostly hypertrophy. When it's for power, I typically use my Omni contraction training system. So it's three whole body workouts. One day is eccentric focus. One day is statodynamic focus. One day is concentric focus. And of course, the programming will change from block to block to include plyometric explosive work, stuff like that. But the push pull leg for me, it's I use that for hypertrophy, not for strength or power. I use a variation for strength in which I would train a lift specific approach. For example, squat and its assistance work on one session, bench and its assistant work on another session, deadlift and its assistance on another session, and then military press and its assistance for another session. That's the closest I would get to a push pull leg split. for strength or performance. But for power, it's not what I use personally. All right, guys, we're up on the questions. Okay, one more, right? Okay, that's a question about the back squat that I saw earlier. With what can I replace my barbell back squat? Is the heavy part of my leg day. I do 6 sets of 6 to 8. Well, first, okay, do you have pain when you're doing squat, or is it just because you're afraid of hurting your lower back? I mean, if it's just you're afraid of hurting your lower back, then just focus on technique a bit more. Might not be that bad. If you're having pain, then yeah, it might change it. And what is your goal? Is it mostly hypertrophy, getting bigger, or is it getting stronger? And if it's getting stronger, is it getting stronger on specific lift? So, in other words, do you need to be strong and good at the back squat? I'm a big fan of the back squat. Again, I'm saying at the beginning of this presentation that I'm squatting every single day. Okay, so uh, but it's not mandatory. If you don't need to test your squat strength for a competition or whatever, if you just want to look bigger or having more muscle or just be overall stronger, you can certainly use other exercises than the back squat. Now, if it's strictly for hypertrophy, just building muscle, machines will work just as well as the squat, just as well as the squat for hypertrophy standpoint. If we're talking about strength, I still believe that doing multi-joint movements uh, is better overall than doing machine exercises, at least for one lift. So if you don't want to do back squat, you might want to do a front squat. You might want to do a trap bar squat or trap bar deadlift with the low handles, not the high handle. That could actually, if you're doing your trap bar deadlift with the low handles and the high ones, and you're using more of a squat motion, so keeping your hips low in the start, that will mimic pretty much what you're doing in your squat. That might be slightly less challenging for your lower back. Again, 6 sets of 6 to 8 reps. It might also be a volume load thing. I mean, 6 sets of 6 to 8 reps. If those 6 to 8 reps are hard sets. So if all of your 6 sets are work sets, that just might be too much work. That just might be too much work. That would be like 40-ish hard reps, heavy reps. That's a lot of load. Maybe if you just do 3 sets of 6 to 8, or if you do 6 sets of 3 to 5, depending on your goal, that might be a better option. But certainly 6 sets of 6 to 8 reps. If those 6 to 8 reps are hard sets, that will be too much for most people. Uh, because fatigue will set in the lower back in other regions that will detract with technique. I would personally not do 6 sets of 6 to 8 reps, and I'm someone who can squat every single day. Okay, so I find that 6 work set of 6 to 8 would be a lot more problematic than the back squat itself. So the first thing I would try just try doing less work sets. Let's do 3 work sets after a good warm up to see how it feels. If it doesn't feel good, then try using front squats. And if you absolutely can do that, then do trap bar deadlift. But certainly the volume load is probably what is the main issue. If it's not technique, it could be technique. But assuming your technique is good, then the volume load, the number of sets, hard sets for a pretty heavy weight, is what will you do you in. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. Good variety of questions today. That's always fun because it's more stimulating for me. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And you guys have a good Christmas, and we'll see you next week.